FBI Director and Republican appointee Chris Wray was grilled on Capitol Hill this week by Republicans, and we took the opportunity to ask U.S. likely voters what they think of the FBI. The same FBI that a majority of voters previously declared as Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. So where are we at now? The FBI is now perceived to be a political weapon, and a significant chunk of Americans are happy about it. First, 22% of voters have a very favorable impression of the FBI, and 50% have an at least somewhat favorable impression. 45% of voters have an unfavorable impression. These results are about the same as in December, slightly higher than a year ago when 46% of voters had a favorable impression, but down incredibly from May 2020 when 60% had a favorable impression. Men view the FBI slightly more favorably than women, and young voters have a much better impression of them than older voters. Black voters are also less than half as likely as others to have a very favorable impression. But here are the party numbers. 69% of Democrats rate the FBI favorably, but only 37% of Republicans, and a slightly higher 43% of independents. Remember, Chris Wray is a Republican appointee. But here are the numbers by Biden approval. 90% of those who strongly approve of Joe Biden have a favorable impression of the FBI. But among those who strongly disapprove of Biden, 83% have an unfavorable impression. That's an incredibly stark us versus them anti-government signal. Is Chris Wray a better or worse director than most of those who held the job before him? 32% of likely voters say worse, and 20% say better. But more voters, 34%, say he's about the same. The age numbers were surprising. 18 to 39-year-olds are far more likely than anyone else to think that Chris Wray is a better FBI director. I have no idea where this is coming from. Perhaps youthful optimism. Democrats are more likely to say better, but Republicans and independents are more likely to say worse. And again, Chris Wray is a Republican appointee. I doubt that many voters actually know that, however, and they're likely making their conclusions based on their general opinions of the FBI. How have these numbers changed since the last time we asked this question in mid-August? Republicans have chilled out a bit, and independents are 6 points more likely to say both he's better and worse. But Democrats have a slightly more favorable signal on Chris Wray since then, and that was a week after the Mar-a-Lago raid. Last month, former FBI Special Agent Nicole Parker testified to a House subcommittee that the FBI has become, quote, politically weaponized, starting from the top in Washington. 64% of voters agree, including 44% who strongly agree. Only 30% of them disagree. But let me say that again. 64% of voters, almost 2 out of 3, think the FBI is politically weaponized by DC politicians. That has to be big news. Recall previously that we asked voters if the FBI was acting as Joe Biden's personal Gestapo. Then a majority agreed, but only 53%. 18 to 39-year-olds are again the outliers. Here, they're more likely to say at least somewhat agree, but much less likely to strongly agree. Here are the party numbers. 80% of Republicans agree, but also 61% of independents and even 50% of Democrats. Now, I'm going to dig into these numbers a bit more to show you something that should be extremely troubling to everyone who watches this channel. Here are voters' impressions of the FBI, based on whether they agree that the FBI has been politically weaponized. And I'm leaving out one column for now. Understandably, those with a very unfavorable impression of the FBI are most likely to agree that it's a political weapon. But it's a stunning 89% of them, with 83% of them strongly agreeing. 73% of those with a somewhat unfavorable impression of the FBI also agree that it's a political weapon. Even 73% of the not sures at least somewhat agree the FBI is politically weaponized. Those three segments represent half of America. A striking loss in confidence for one of our most important federal agencies. Now, those with somewhat favorable impressions of the FBI, 28% of the American electorate, are kind of just confused about this whole topic. But check these numbers out. Of the 22% of voters who have a very favorable impression of the FBI, 56% of them, or correspondingly about 12% of the electorate, also agree that the FBI is politically weaponized. 41% of them strongly agree, and only 31% of them strongly disagree. If you're watching this video right now, please like it so others can get this message and share it. Let me restate those facts in another way. About 10% of American voters rate the FBI very favorably, and then also strongly agree that it is, quote, Politically Weaponized, starting from the top in Washington. And just as crazy, only 31% of those who rate the FBI very favorably strongly disagree that it has been politically weaponized. Now let's pile on Chris Wray for a second. 82% of those who say he's worse than his predecessors agree that the FBI is politically weaponized, 69% strongly. But 74% of those who think he's better than his predecessors also agree. It's the people who think Chris Wray is about the same who are least likely to think the FBI is weaponized. So to put that another way, 20% of voters think Chris Wray is a better FBI director than his predecessors, and that signal is coming almost entirely from people who agree that the FBI has been weaponized by DC politicians. Who rates Chris Wray best out of everybody? Incredibly, those who strongly approve of Joe Biden. They're 4 times more likely to say he's a better director than a worse one. If you've been following our channel, you know that voters are clamoring for accountability, with strong majorities wanting to investigate things like the CDC's handling of COVID, Biden's GarageGate scandal, and also the FBI's involvement in social media censorship. With only 30% of voters having at least some faith the FBI hasn't become a political tool, I think it's fair to say that this is still a very fertile field for Republicans. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter, and if you think this story is important, please help us share it. And thanks for watching.